I'm Leo Walder for Kit Guru. This is Leo Says number 8, the last before Christmas of 2017. We're going to get one more in before the end of the year, however, so not the end of 2017 quite yet, thankfully. The year has rushed by. For today, we've got the main buzzwords. We've got Nvidia, we've got AMD, we've got Microsoft, and we've got Apple. Hurrah! I may have... Oh, and an Intel. I do have Intel, that's good. So the Nvidia thing, mildly amusing this, those Titan XP graphics cards with the Star Wars themes, you know, which do you want it, the dark side or the light side, Jedi, discounted, down from £1,149 to $999. Get them while they're still lukewarm. Also, I understand the movie's not very good. Haven't seen it myself, don't intend to. But the reports, Europeans seem to love it, but Brits don't seem to be too hot on it. Anyway, that's just a passing comment. But those graphics cards, I do wonder how many Nvidia has nailed to the shelf. Obviously, I hope it's not very many. Then, news in brief. Western Digital, Toshiba, a bit of a dispute about Toshiba NAND assets. You'll recall Toshiba's trying to raise money. They bought Westinghouse, was it? The nuclear company in America, lost fortunes. And they have to raise money, so they're selling off their NAND assets, which is, for us geek type people, very, very big news that. And there was a dispute because Western Digital is a part owner of the company, but Bain Capital, Western Digital, Toshiba apparently sorted everything out and hopefully amicably. Bain is now clear to buy Toshiba's NAND assets. We need Toshiba NAND flowing if chips flow because at the moment Samsung rules the roost, and as we know the prices of SSDs and DRAM horribly high. So the more competition, the better. And Toshiba 3D NAND is, as far as I can see, the only game in town up against Samsung. Although Intel does seem to have some stuff on the go. But Toshiba, we need you. We need you. So good. As to whether Bain opening, who knows? Don't know what the consequence of that is. But anyway, hopefully it means they can concentrate on actually making chips rather than the business stuff. The Microsoft thing. I haven't used Microsoft Office in years. I had problems 2004, 2005 when a copy of Office refused to reactivate after I made some PC changes. I changed the motherboard and processor, and Windows and Office both insisted on being reactivated. Windows is no problem. That's Windows XP back then. Office wouldn't have any of it. And Microsoft couldn't fix it, so that was the end of Office, even though that was a legit £300 and something Office suite. Fortunes, I thought. But still, it broke. That was the end of that. I went to OpenOffice and then LibreOffice, and I've been happy ever since. And I've dumped Outlook at the same time, and I've used Thunderbird for all that time ever since. Both free, both work perfectly well. I'm happy. Just recently, the fall update to Windows 10, or possibly full update, that's version 1709. So that came along. I installed it on my PC. I've done it on various test laptops and such, like no trouble whatsoever. My nearest and dearest, who also runs Windows 10, uses Microsoft Office 2007. That's a fully legit paid for copy. And after the Windows update, it broke. Couldn't open Outlook even. Outlook was locked. Let's try that. And various files and such like. Each time you opened any file, a spreadsheet, a document, it said, oh, just checking this out. It was obviously broken. Rolled back the Windows update. It's been fine. I'm about to rip out Office and install LibreOffice and Thunderbird, and that should be fine. But that's just a bore. I wondered, was it just me? Posted a comment on Facebook, and a chap from Mayhems, the British cooling company, responded saying that they were equally unhappy and a bunch of machines running Office 2013 had broken. Office 2013, that up to date. The implication is that Microsoft only wants you running, what is it now, Office 365, the online app. So I'm surprised there hasn't been an outcry here. Conceivably, I was unlucky, they were unlucky up at Mayhem's, and that's it, perhaps nobody else. But the idea that a Windows update and Windows 10 update breaks legitimate copies, I mean, why do you need to update your Office? If your Office is 10 years old but you just use little spreadsheets and you write stuff, why do you need to update Office at fortunes? Annoying. Anyway, this has lost Microsoft a customer. I don't know what Mayhem's is going to do. That's obviously their business. But if you've had problems with the latest full update 1709 for Windows 10, be interested to hear. Do leave a comment below, please. Also, somebody asked me when I posted this comment about Office, they thought I was saying I used Office, and the answer is I don't. So there's sort of still Google Docs. You know, the idea someone used Microsoft Office in 2017, they thought really peculiar. So do you use Microsoft Office or some other suite? I'll be interested to know that as well. The Apple-y stuff. We've got some... Well, let's start with the more interesting thing. Recently, Kit Guru posted Dominic's review of the Sapphire RX Vega 64 Nitro graphics card, and it came across as a hard read. Quite clearly, Sapphire has done their best with a graphics chip that is very, very toasty. I don't think it helped that it was posted the same day, actually, as my review of an Asus ROG Poseidon GTX 1080 Ti, which has got this hybrid cooler. So it's 2.5 slot card. Works very well in air-cooled mode, but you can just simply plumb in some liquid cooling without changing the cooler or block, and then it runs on liquid. Works really well, very, very good indeed. By contrast, the Vega, very, very toasty, and it drew 100 watts more than that Poseidon GTX 1080, and yet the performance was not as good, and it's expensive. Now, on the face of it, therefore, that's just a catastrophe, and that's the end of the story, despite Sapphire's best efforts to just make it as good as possible. And yet, I have to wonder. I'm actually going to do some work with RX Vega for video editing with Adobe Premiere. And the reason I'm thinking there might still be some hope for RX Vega is that the new iMac Pro has been announced. We've been waiting for this for months. Not the iMac Pro. The iMac has RX 580 graphics, but the iMac Pro is the one that you can fully spec, and it can include Vega along with up to 18 cores of Xeon. The full spec price, £12,300 in the UK, and it's barely any more in dollars. We're getting stiffed on the pound-dollar conversion rate by Apple, absolutely hammered. But that includes RX Vega. It is hard to imagine that Apple has built the iMac Pro costing £12,300 or just under $13,000 with RX Vega, and it's going to stink. I just cannot believe this. So we shall see how it works out, but I'm really keen to get a look at RX Vega and use it as a working, proper graphics card doing video editing, just to see if it has a good side. Clearly for gamers, but for video editing, you never know. More Apple news. Do you laugh or do you cry? A couple of days ago now, Primate Labs, who are the people behind Geekbench, they ran a story saying they'd tested a bunch of iPhones. They say older iPhones, but as far as I can see, they appear to be iPhone 6 and iPhone 7. It's not really that old. And as you update with different versions of iOS, lo and behold, the thing will slow down. They speculated at the time, and Apple has since confirmed. Apple confirmed today, yes, this is true. Apparently, it's a protection mechanism. Older iPhones, the batteries start to die; they get older, and as a consequence, when your iPhone has 30 or 40% charge, it can suddenly shut down, which sounds fairly rubbish to me. So, what they've done in response, and this started with iOS 10.2, but the big change appears to have been from 11.2.0 to 11.2.1, is your phone will slow down. This is a way essentially of throttling the phone, which means it doesn't have the battery so hard, and therefore when your battery hits 30-40% charge, it won't suddenly go off. Well, fair enough. So they call this power management features, and it's crystal clear they weren't going to mention this until they were basically challenged. So Geekbench, good work. Apple, Now, either Apple is protecting iPhone owners from the perils of dodgy batteries, well, yeah, or they're basically throttling the phone so your older phone looks like it's getting slower over time. You think, that iPhone 8 or that iPhone 10, what a good idea that would be. And you'd have to be a cynic to think they're throttling the phone to make it look worse than a new phone. I mean, that would be cynical. So clearly it's power management just to preserve the phone, not because they built a crud battery or anything. They're doing you a favour. That's what it is. So if you have a very old iPhone 6 or 7 and you want to hang on to it, well, you're going to suffer. That's all there is to it. And as the battery gets older and older, you're going to suffer more. That's just how it is. And then we come to, we've got AMD. Mobile Ryzen, we've got some leaks. One of the things I'm expecting at CES 2018 is Mobile Ryzen. I've been expecting Mobile Ryzen for months. But we've got some leaks that appear completely solid of Ryzen 5, 3, 7 and another 5. And then the numbers, it's all So Ryzen 5 2400G, Ryzen 3 2200G, Ryzen 7 2700U, Ryzen 5 2500U. And in that, nicking model codes kind of thing from Intel. So the U suffix, I presume, means ultra low power because they're 15 watt TDP, whereas the more beefy G versions, don't know what G stands for, let's call it general, they can either be 35 or 65 watt. 65 obviously is desktop kind of territory for a processor, but when you put in the graphics core, that's more efficient. 35 watts on the other hand, now we're talking 15 watts, definitely low power. And you've got basically 4 processor cores across the piece, but depending on which spec, you've either got 8 or 4 threads. And then you've got different graphics, Vega 11, Vega 8, Vega 10 and Vega 8. Don't know what they are at the moment, but so 4 different SKUs, and they appear to be quite different in terms of power, and you have to assume therefore performance. Be interested to see, really hope that those are indeed at CES, looking to see then how they perform, because whatever we see at CES won't tell us a whole great deal of anything. It just means the product is coming very soon. I've just yesterday done my review of the Fractal Design Define R6, 3 years, 1 month and a few days after the release of Fractal Design Define R5. I love the R6. The R6 is a really good case. And yet the funny thing is, looking at reviews from other reviewers, you'll appreciate I do my review. I'm working on it for days before it goes live, and as is everybody else. And then the reviews go live, and then I get to look at other people's reviews, and you're kind of comparing notes going, whew, saw that, think the same, disagree, missed that, ouch, or whatever. And basically, and across the piece, the reviewers seem to think the R6 is a good piece of work, and I'm not surprised because it is. 1 or 2 people seem less impressed. Not bad. There isn't a bad review of the Define R6 out there as far as I can see. They appear to be, the worst seems to be it's all right. It doesn't make the same mistake as many other cases on the market, and that seems like a perfectly reasonable observation. The thing is that a lot of it comes down to testing of cases. It depends how you test. If what you're really interested in ultimately is airflow and cooling, I mean, at a certain point we'll get an open test bench. That's the ultimate for cooling. It's not the least bit convenient or practical, but it works. So then you're into compromises. As soon as you have an enclosure around a case, you're hanging components in there, airflow gets obstructed, and then you've got the trade-off of cooling, ease of use, styling, and noise being a big one. One point I do actually have my reservations about is filtration. I like to see a case that's fully filtered, but I don't actually think that dust filters do a great deal of good. Certainly they'll pull some nastiness out of the air. They'll catch sort of things in the air. You won't get insects inside your case. But in terms of catching the fine particles of dust, your fans end up covered in dust over time. That's all there is to it. So even the best filters don't really work that well, and a really good filter cuts airflow quite significantly. So it's not as cut and dried as it might seem. Something to take the real crud out of the air is a good thing, but past a certain point you can get too obsessed by it. Airflow on the other hand, and noise, now these are the things, it's a trade-off. It's always a trade-off. The quieter the case, the hotter it is. The more air it flows, the noisier it is. Which do you put as your big priority? And the trouble is I want both, but what I really want is a quiet case, but I want it to flow air adequately. And in the case of the Define R6, you can open the top of the case. It's their new Moduvent system. So you pop a button, you lift off the panel, you then have to separate the 2 bits of the panel because it's a bit of a fiddle, that one. And then you pop in the sort of main grill, leaving off the nice cosmetic top, and then the thing can flow air, as far as I'm concerned, like a champ. Instead of just flowing air out to the rear through the 140 fan, you can also flow it through the top. One of the 2 builds I did had 3 120 fans, and I could have gone bigger, but that was just bish, job done. And I had no problems at cooling. Figures on KitGuru as per usual. That build I was using a Threadripper 12 core and a GTX 980. And it worked absolutely admirably, and I was entirely happy, and it was very quiet. I've noticed that 1 or 2 other reviews use a tower air cooler on whichever CPU they've got, and the orientation means that the air is flowing from the front across through the tower cooler out the back, and what's going up? Not a lot. Whereas if you have an all-in-one in the roof of the case, then the air is going to get taken more directly out the top. You've got far more area. So to me, it makes sense to have an all-in-one in the roof of the case. But this actually brings a couple of points here. One is, when you're testing cases, it is tempting to always use the same hardware. If you do that, you can say that you can go back to your database and you can look at a case that you tested last year or the year before, and you can compare it to a new case, and you can see how's the new one compare. This is completely true, but it also, to my mind, is a little bit irrelevant because even if gaming hardware was all the same and remained the same, and Intel didn't update processors and such like year after year and graphics cards, then you want different specs for different cases. If you're building a mini ITX system, are you going to put the same hardware in that you put in an all-powering, all-conquering gaming system? No. Or indeed a system that you're using mainly for office stuff, which can have a slow graphics card, a decent processor, SSD, and a whole bunch of drives. It's all different. So I tend to build different PCs. I mean, I use similar-ish components each time. I'll usually go for a Core i7 rather than the Core i5, for example. But whether I go with high-end desktop stuff rather than Kaby Lake and then now Coffee Lake remains to be seen. I could easily chuck in a Ryzen 7 or indeed a Threadripper. And in this case, I use Threadripper. But it's pretty much a toss of a coin. I'm looking at it going, well, that case could support anything. The one thing I wouldn't do is put a Core i3 in a regular desktop case. That strikes me as unreasonable. But if you have a mini system, is it fair to put, well, not Threadripper, because you can't get small form factor Threadripper, but 18-core Intel Core i9, for example, in a mini ITX would strike me as, you could do it, but it's a bit of a harsh test. So, to my mind, you should change the build around depending on what you're what the system you're building, the purpose, the case, the likely user. To take this to the extreme, Thermaltake released their enormous glass tower case. I think it's called the Tower. It looks like a vending machine. It's just huge. It stands yay tall. It's this big. If you don't put 3 radiators in it and dozens of fans, it looks blooming stupid. And I saw at least one reviewer who did their conventional review of it. It was like a Core i5 or Core i7 motherboard with, I think, a tower cooler, actually. You could have put, kittens in the case alongside this motherboard. Many, many, many kittens, and they'd have been in space. It was just the strangest thing to see. And I could see why they did what they did. It just made no sense to me. So to my mind, if you're building a system, it makes sense to build it appropriately for the likely user of that case. Here's the other thing. Fractal Design, in this instance, they make a range of, they market a range of liquid coolers. They're all Acetec now. So I use the Celsius S24, which is a 240mm Acetec. So common sense is you stick it in the roof. To my mind, if you use an air cooler in a Fractal Design case, you're kind of deliberately shying away from Fractal's own coolers towards another brand, which just strikes me as, why would you do that? Unless you're religiously clinging to the thing of, I want to be able to put these figures in my database. So that's really a very long-winded way of saying you really can't compare any of my reviews with previous reviews unless they happen to be similar components, because they're pretty much all different. Because I'm changing my mind with each new build. I look back at the Define R5 review because, as I say, 3 years, 1 month and a couple of days before the Define R6. There's not one thing I'm doing the same in that review as in this review. It's 3 years apart, totally different worlds. The world has moved on hugely, and it's much, much better these days, frankly. Much better. So here we are at the end of 2017, heading into Christmas. So Merry Christmas. I'll be back to wish you a Happy New Year, however. If you like this video, thumbs up. If you don't, thumbs down. Do please leave comments about your Office suite, because I would be interested to hear about that. And also, obviously, anything you think about Apple, because that's always fun. I'm Leo Warder for Kit Guru. This is Leo Says.